Today we have Ahmer Naqvi with us on the podcast. Ahmer is a man of many different skills, um, from cricket to music to biryani. He has written about everything, and he can talk about anything under the sun. Ahmer, एक बात बताओ आप, अगर 92 के वर्ल्ड कप में इंडिया की तरफ से मोदी जी खेले होते तो क्या पाकिस्तान जीतता?
I mean, आज मैं यही देख रहा था कि 2014 से इंडिया जो भी टूर्नामेंट खेल रहा है उसमें नॉकआउट्स में निकल रहा है. सो आई एम नॉट श्योर 2004 में इंडिया में हुआ क्या था, बट जो कुछ भी हुआ है उससे मतलब कोई नेक्स्ट लेवल पनौटी सीन इंडिया का चल रहा है. एंड 92 में, आई मीन एट दिस पॉइंट 92 भी एक मतलब वो you either you either die a good memory or you live long enough to deliver a divisive prime minister. I think that's what.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राज धर्म का पालन करें.
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है.
अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू.
Here's the thing. As far as your prime minister goes, there is still some there is still some kind of value to why that guy is there. I mean, हमारे वाले का तो background ही इतना unclear है कि किसी ने कोई बचपन में मिला ही नहीं है. मोदी जी is like, and I'm sorry to all the religious people, but he's like one of those prophets जिनकी लाइफ के शुरू के 30 साल गायब हैं. उसी के बाद पता चलता है कि उन्होंने क्या किया है. लेकिन हाँ, इंडिया में कुछ ऐसे लोग हैं जो जरूर ये बिलीव करते हैं कि अगर अभी भी मोदी जी को अगर हम लोगों ने अपने 15 में रखना शुरू कर दिया ना तो हम सारे टूर्नामेंट जीत. So we thought that it's a good time to bring in Hammer for a number of things. Number one is because Pakistan again has come up to the consciousness of the Indian mass because of the cricket match, but also because it's never too far away from our minds. We love you so much that we hate you. Also, we wanted to get a point of view from someone who has, and Hammer, I'm not saying that you're old, but you have seen.
But I'm old.
But you have seen. So this is so when we were talking about getting you in, right? One of the things that we talked about, and I'm sure this question has been asked to you 1,000 times before, but growing up in the 90s, when you saw, for example, and this could be a very cliche type sawal, but when you saw like a Shah Rukh Khan as like one of the premier Bollywood actor, or an Azharuddin as the captain of the Indian cricket team, did it ever make you think about the whole idea of Pakistan and like what exactly it means?
I
Because
think my first um, sort of confusion came at a very young age, and it forever determined which of the Bollywood Khans I never liked. And that was, I think, in Qiyamat Se Qiyamat Tak, Amir Khan kisses someone on the lips. It is matlab
Juhi
ki,
Chawla.
you know,
Juhi Chawla.
Juhi Chawla. Yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. Okay, so before I begin, I would like to say that probably a lot of people who know me as who are friends and family and others who followed me will know that I'm really not the right person to be talking a lot about Bollywood culture and Bollywood films, etc. Particularly in Pakistan, may people know their shit about Hindi cinema. I think just as much as most people across the subcontinent. So I'm very much, the Junaid Zia of Bollywood knowledge. Okay, I'm just here because of my connections. I don't really deserve to be talking about this. So I'll put that disclaimer out first.
नहीं, मैं बस इतना सा कह रहा था कि क़यामत से क़यामत तक वो जो किस था ना, वो किस की वजह से आज जूही चावला भी संगी है.
Bro, Juhi
ये तो
Chawla
हालत
paid
है.
Aryan's bail. Okay, so that's
No, so that's the thing. So Shah Rukh is beyond
yeah.
India. So that's why, like, even people like Ravina Tandon and like Juhi Chawla, like जो usually संगी type ही रहते हैं, even they were like नहीं, बात Shah Rukh की है. So,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, so yeah, so when Amir kisses Juhi on the lips, and I mean, it is literally a surface kiss, right? Like and his thumbs are
कुछ
covering
भी
up
नहीं.
That was
a lot of the
89.
lips.
Bhai,
Yeah.
that was 89. So
So
yeah,
I'm
I
like
mean,
6, right? And I guess it says a lot about Pakistan and everything that at 6 I was aware that Amir Khan is a Muslim, and in India not everyone's a Muslim, and he's kissing someone, and kissing someone is really not allowed. And I was horrified. I was like, how can a Muslim kiss? How can he kiss? And so, 5 6 years later, when Shah Rukh emerges, like I'm fully primed to be Team Shah Rukh, because it's just like Amir, this fucking heathen, was
इनफैक्ट
going around.
इनफैक्ट शाहरुख की तो अर्ली मूवीज में उसको मतलब ही वाज दैट ना कि मिल नहीं रही है लड़की
Yeah, he
तो
was he was what we would call an incel today, but like an anti-hero back then. And क्या कहते हैं, तो I think के जो तुम्हारा सवाल है, like I think that's a really early point where you have to be aware of a lot of different categories to be scandalized by that, right? And I think, like, क्योंकि हमारी audience desi होगी, we're all very much aware of the intricacies of what can cause a scandal when you're watching, especially Bollywood, with your family. And I'm sure, like, it
ओह
varies from
हाँ.
house to house, but it is
अरे
it
मेरी भी एक
is
आमिर स्टोरी है, मैं इसके बाद बताता हूँ.
yeah. So
Amir took it up a level more in Raja Hindustani, and it was a full blown kiss to Karishma Kapoor in '97, and that was a film that I was
in the
in the
rain
rain.
like it was even more like the
So I was
settings
watching
and
it with
everything
the
was
whole
yeah.
family in a theater, and you know how it is. सुना, पर मैं ये कहना चाहता कि जो कल्चरल कंजम्पशन होता है, एक like growing up as a Pakistani,
yeah,
जिसमें
yeah.
you kind of watch a lot of Indian cinema, and in all of Indian cinema, even in the 90s and early, there is a subtle stereotyping of Muslims then Pakistanis. Like for example, अनवर मियाँ से भी ज्यादा आपका ये, अगर आपने वो सरफरोश का वो, like basically
हाँ हाँ
they
the good
said
Muslim of India
जो सबसे जो हाल ही में एक मिसाल है, and that was something that was I was really shocked by, was was in Sacred Games, which was like, was a beautifully, at least for an outsider, बहुत जबरदस्त मुंबई की portrayal थी. You really learned a lot about, like, especially season 1 was really was just like one of my favorite seasons of television ever. But the guy who's like blowing up nuclear bombs is still like, आदाब अम्मी जान, आज आपने गालिब के दिमाग से कौन सी अशार पढ़े हैं, और बेटा हम अपने पान like, it's just like, bro, what the fuck? Like, I think that was where it's just like it's one thing for it to be in commercial cinema, but it's really like and I think it's instructive, because, like, when you guys are saying as a Pakistani, etc., etc., I think, like, something that also, it's Pakistan's a huge country, right? 220 million people, and so much of what is considered Pakistani, because a very narrow definition of Pakistan, and that definition really only includes, like, Urdu speaking people, as they're referred to in Karachi, and then, like, Punjabis, and then everyone else is like on a lower rung of that ladder, and it's harder for them to be kind of incorporated into the national narrative, right? So I think, अब जैसे कि अगर मैं ये कहूँ कि हाँ बॉलीवुड सब देखते हैं या नहीं देखते हैं, like Bollywood is definitely something that's very transcendental, but maybe um, you know um, like urban locales में तो it's huge across class. But yeah, like, in a lot of ways, like, I would want to be very wary of trying to give, like, some kind of homogenous Pakistani experience. That being said, I think I would feel in certain ways there is even more क्या कहते हैं, access to Indian culture, pop culture, because, for example, pehle Bollywood was your major kind of entryway, right? And cricket, or ab matlab, I think the internet has really really opened up. There's a lot of Indian social media celebrities, and influencers, and TikTok personalities and YouTubers that are huge in Pakistan. Similarly, I think something else that, like, the music scene in India, and particularly the hip hop scene in India, has been really क्या कहते हैं, has been really influential within Pakistan. Like, I think a lot of young people listen to Bollywood music, but they also listen a lot to, like the hip
Indian
hop
Ocean
scene.
kind of.
Not
So
Indian.
मैं
No, not that. Like I meant like Divine and Nazy and
हाँ, yeah. Is it not like a, I hope it is not, because जैसे इंडिया में जो elite टाइप के लोग होते हैं ना, जो लिब्बो elites होते हैं, वो हम तो कोक स्टूडियो सुनते हैं पाकिस्तान वाला, इंडिया वाला इज नॉट दैट
No, actually, I would say
गुड.
कि जो cool बनने के लिए लोग हैं पाकिस्तान में, I mean, I'm a bit checked out of the music scene for a while now, but I would say actually कि जो hip hop, जो Indian hip hop ज़्यादा मशहूर है, it's actually more amongst like a class that might define itself as middle class and then the actual middle class or even low, working class kids in Karachi at least are listening to it. And amongst like the more burger types as we call them over here, I guess they'll be उनमें से कुछ सुन रहे हैं but ज़्यादातर वही Drake या Migos or whatever वैसी किस्म की चीजों में interested होंगे. But again, like I think Bollywood जैसे एक उसकी उसकी पावर का अगर मैं आपको एक मिसाल दूं कि अभी हैलोवीन पार्टी पे मैं गया था वीकेंड पे और वहां पे उन्होंने डीजे वीजे बुलाया हुआ था और बार भी थी just like for curious Indian followers और also जब मैं वहां पहुंचा था तो पुलिस आई हुई थी like पुलिस की मोबाइल बाहर थी और मतलब as the
आंटी ने
court
पुलिस बुला ली
बादशाह
थी.
literally किसी आंटी ने पुलिस बुलाई हुई थी बट उसमें ना वो फुल गाने चला रहे थे like वेस्टर्न रीमिक्स टेक्नो शिक्नो ये वो और क्राउड उसमें ना like half heartedly डांस कर रहा था खास तौर पे जिन्होंने सारे पैसे वैसे दिए थे वो were trying to make the best of it and then every time they'd split they put a Bollywood song and anecdotally like Karachi parties play their Bollywood songs a lot later. They still try and be cool. Like Lahori parties will bust out the Bollywood faster, but varies from party to party, of course. But they would play Bollywood, Bollywood, I'm not Indian music, Indian commercial music, and everyone would be dancing and they know the lyrics and everything, and then they'd switch back to some like freaking, world chart dance thing, and slowly the crowd would melt away. So I think, I mean, I wouldn't say that, at least to my knowledge, and obviously I'm now old enough to have multiple teenagers live out my lifespan. But I think I would say that from what I can observe, there's still a lot of exposure to Indian pop culture.
वो सब ठीक है अमर आप ये बताओ आपने चक दे इंडिया देखी है
So Chak De India, like I've watched in bits because like people in my house have been watching it, but I've
तो
never
क्या
seen the whole thing.
when you watch that movie do you support India to win the World Cup? Do you want India to win the World Cup in Chak De India?
I um I, no, no, I don't.
This is something that I fascinates me, and this is why I kind of go back to this all the time. Is how do you react to like even like I don't know border? कैसा फील करता होगा कोई बंदा जब ऐसा चक दे इंडिया या बॉर्डर देखता होगा और उसको
See, the thing is, that's where I feel stupid saying this because it's hard to measure what I'm saying. But culture की जो सबसे compelling बात ही यही होती है कि it really transcends a lot of like your stupid biases and things about the world, right? So if you're watching a good film and so like अभी वो जो एक movie है जिसमें वो आलिया भट्ट जो है वो
राजी
double agent है,
राजी
yeah, right? So my parents are watching it. My parents have, pretty standard kind of Pak patriot views. They're getting better because I'm yelling at the dinner table a lot, but they and they're full getting emo about Alia Bhatt's character and everything, and like my siblings are trolling them कि भाई ये तो पाकिस्तान के खिलाफ है and whatever. But I mean, obviously, if it's a good kind of story, like because I think at least as Pakistanis, we are part of also experiencing an uptick in, for example, in Hollywood, where you see Muslim villains, right? Like from like the Cold War kind of Russians to Muslims kind of becoming more common. And so आपको वही होता है कि kind of like जब ये हो रहा है तो अब मतलब यार movie है, like अब इस पे भी आके चिक चिक करनी पड़ेगी. Like I think for a lot of people it's that, right? Like, and I think as long as where it's like where the film is respecting its primary mandate, which is to entertain, then I think audiences go along with like, yeah, okay, whatever, ye to kya pa kar rahe hain, but I'm still here to watch, cry or laugh or whatever else this movie is attempting to make me feel.
पता नहीं क्यों मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इंडिया में अगर इस तरीके का क्या सीन उल्टा करके मूवी आया तो पता नहीं इंडियंस देखेंगे
नहीं,
कैसे,
रिलीज
आई
ही
डोंट
नहीं
नो।
होगी। वो आने के पहले, सो उसके पहले ही
क्या
वो माहौल ऐसा बन जाएगा कि ये है वो है और बैन हो जाएगी। एंड
बट जैसे
अरे बाहर से आने का छोड़, इंडिया में बनने वालों के साथ ऐसा हो जाता है।
बट जैसे हम लोग
तो
हर लम्हा पुरजोश देख लेते हैं ना, उसी तरह आई थिंक द पैरेलल इज दैट।
अरे हम
I
लोग
mean, I
देखते हैं
think
हर लम्हा
देखो एक
पुरजोश,
चीज ये
सब
भी
नहीं देखते।
एक चीज I feel where BJP has played this really I don't know if I don't want to give them anyone like false credit, so I don't know if this was a conscious thing, but I think for example when बहुत सारे लोग इंडिया में ही कह रहे थे कि if it's going to get so ugly then maybe we shouldn't play cricket, etc. I think it's the reverse. It's like when you're not playing and you become Pakistan becomes more and more and more exoticized, it becomes easier to kind of perpetuate these narratives. And I think the biggest thing in India that was like, because fascism always creates farce, like that's a natural byproduct, I feel. और क्या कहते हैं कि इंडिया में जो पुलवामा के अराउंड जो पूरे था ना, मतलब पुलवामा इज लाइक कि उमर अकमल कहता है कि मैं जब भी पानी पीता हूँ तो मेरा वजन बढ़ जाता है.
हाँ वो
Right now, Umar Akmal believes that, I'm sure. And people in India believe that Pulwama or whatever the fuck happened. But guys, it's like nothing happened.
नहीं
You know, like
मैं
I
ये
feel like
कहना
when-
चाहता हूँ, सो फॉर मैं क्या करता
सब
हूँ,
इट हैपेंड। अब उस पे मूवी भी बन गई, वो हिट भी हो गई, उसका
Yeah.
मीम भी बन गई, सब हो
मैं
गया।
क्या करता हूँ, सो देयर यहाँ पे मेरा एक कॉलीग है, पाकिस्तानी कॉलीग है, एंड देयर आर नंबर ऑफ इंडियन कॉलीग्स हियर। तो मैं मेरा जो पाकिस्तानी मतलब कॉलीग है, फ्रेंड है, उसको मैं उचकाता रहता हूँ, सो टू गो आउट टू दिस गाइज एंड जस्ट लाइक हाउस द टी ये पूछने का मेरे को बड़ा मजा आता है। पर हाँ नहीं, सी एट द एंड ऑफ द डे दे वांट टू बिलीव समथिंग। आई मीन I have to be honest, if there was any other government in India and had an Indian Air Force personnel became I don't know, prisoner of war, जो भी captured in Pakistan and then returned, that government I feel would have lost the next election because it's a humiliation, honestly. But somehow it is also like, so इसीलिए मुझे मोदी के कभी कभी
So नहीं तो वही मैं बात कर रहा
इफेक्ट
हूँ ना कि जब आपने मतलब अब आपके पिछले 7 साल में कोई किसी की लेवल पे जो कल्चरल इंटरेक्शन होती थी वो हर किस्म से रोक दी गई है, राइट? गाने और वो फलाना ढिमकाना, और
फवाद।
सबसे बड़ी चीज क्रिकेट, फवाद, राइट? एंड देन फिर आपने क्रिकेट रोक दी, जो सबसे एक और बहुत बड़ी चीज थी, ठीक है? और क्या कहते हैं कि उसके बाद आपने जो है ये सब कुछ बंद करने के बाद सारा जो वो उसका स्फेयर बना दिया है कि जी ये जिसको नहीं जाना हो पाकिस्तान चला जाए और फलाना हो जाए ढिमकाना हो जाए। तो उस पूरे चक्कर में मतलब आई थिंक इट बिकम्स easier and easier also to demonize and to think like like I think India losing to Pakistan the way it did really kind of had it broke that kind of reality field that BJP had created a little bit. It cracked it a little bit because
very
like
very
people are
little
like
because
kind of
इसीलिए मैं उस दिन हरी शर्ट पहन के बैठा था दोस्त।
the
ये चाहता था।
पर डिफेंस
Like-
मैकेनिज्म ये रहता है ना कि अभी एक अजीब सा बिहेवियर हो गया है कि अरे हमारे पास पैसा ज्यादा है। आई डोंट नो कि कहाँ से ये आइडिया आ गया है कि हमारे पास पैसा ज्यादा, हमारे पास पैसा ज्यादा है नहीं, पर कहीं से आइडिया आ गया कि हमारे पास पैसा ज्यादा
नहीं पैसा तो है ज्यादा, खासतौर पे
अरे
इंडियन
नहीं है
क्रिकेट
वैसा
के
पैसा
पास तो
ज्यादा।
बहुत
हंगर
है।
इंडेक्स में
नहीं,
देख रहे हो,
द पॉइंट इज कि जो लोग ये सोच रहे हैं और जो लोग ये ट्वीट कर रहे हैं उनके पास नहीं है। तो वो लोग, उनके पास सिर्फ एक मिराज है जिसको वो सोच के कर रहे हैं।
या सो आई थिंक मतलब, और वही मिराज जो है वो जितना मतलब एक वो परपेचुएट होता रहता है इसी तरीके से कि जब आपको एनकाउंटर ही नहीं करना है अदर, सो देन इट बिकम्स अ लॉट इजियर टू क्रिएट ग्रेटर एंड ग्रेटर फैंटेसीज अबाउट लाइक both your own grandeur and like the dangers from external forces and X and Y and Z. So yeah, like I think it plays into their hands, into the extremist hands, and particularly in India when all of these cultural exchanges are not happening.
और अदराइजेशन, अरे कल्चरल एक्सचेंजेस की बात करो तो इंडिया हैज अ सब्सटैंशियल मुस्लिम पॉपुलेशन, राइट? But the way everything has panned out in India, and not just under Modi, but for decades now, Muslims live in their own ghettos. So it is very easy for like an urban Hindu child to go complete all of their schooling without ever making a Muslim friend, and that makes it much easier for them to otherize this idea of a Muslim, जो
and
कि
which
होता
is
रहता है.
and which is also why like they want to purge say Bollywood out of all Muslim symbols and Muslim icons essentially, right? Because for a
Hmm.
at least for a lot of us growing up, we at least had this notion of having a say a celebrity Muslim figure who is not very different to us, say the Khans or
So yeah,
Indian cricket per se. Like, but what they
Azhar.
really want to do right now is like purge all of these pop culture of Muslim iconography and Muslims in general, and
Hmm.
then you'll have another generation which doesn't associate with Muslims in any normal way at all.
But that's why I also feel, because it's an opportune time. अभी कल ही शाहरुख का बर्थडे भी था, तो for all the shitty characters that we already said he has played, which are basically toxic masculinity वाले जो characters थे, but his real life is so important to be, मतलब जैसे अभी because of his birthday, a lot of his old videos, interviews are
Yeah,
circulating around,
yeah.
जिसमें he's describing कि मतलब कैसे हमारी दो जैसे वैसी शादी हुई, and हम गणेश विसर्जन भी करते हैं, नमाज भी पढ़ते
अरे
हैं,
वो
but I
प्रॉब्लम
mean,
वही है ना. प्रॉब्लम ये है कि द आइडिया ऑफ वो एपीजे अब्दुल कलाम भी है, राइट. वो आइडिया ये है कि मुस्लिम, टू बी अ गुड इंडियन मुस्लिम यू हैव टू बी अ सर्टेन वे, और उसी वजह से ये मोहम्मद सिराज जब नेशनल एंथम के वक्त रोता है तो वो एक न्यूज बन जाती है. लाइक यू हैव टू शो दैट यू आर एक्स्ट्रा पेट्रियोटिक.
I just also want to touch upon this. With the last few weeks or so, we're also really kind of reminded of Shah Rukh's larger than like true star power. Kya hoti hai? Like, because it's one thing to kind of witness it, but it's another to kind of witness it within yourself, that you're kind of like seeking out old Shah Rukh videos and retweeting all those stories about how he'd been nice to people, and you just like, I was watching that AIB interview he did, and it's just incredible how
This is
he's
an
never been
excellent
humble in
podcast.
it, and yet he is just like, as my friend said, like he makes you feel like, yes, he's like Shah Rukh, but he's working really hard to please you, and I think that's just this incredible thing that he's kind of had, and I've kind of been lucky that way too, because of work, been around kind of these huge figures who have like a lot of popularity, and there is something really fascinating about someone like that, and particularly people who kind of regularly provoke joy in others. Like when you're around Afridi, and there's a crowd around, like like you'll see that it's not just कि वो crowd पागल हो रहा है, but जो rangers or soldiers उसे protect कर रहे हैं वो भी कह रहे हैं कि शायद भाई selfie हो जाए, and like it's just that kind of thing. And with Charak, obviously, you saw that as well. And I feel that where, in like otherwise a pretty depressing podcast, I would say, I think that's something to me that's always kind of the most hopeful thing about humanity, is that we have like this capacity for joy and wonder and creativity. And it persists regardless of how terrible the situation is. Like I think once again, as Pakistan, the land of the future, like things can get a lot worse, and yet you still are also able to have moments of joy. And I think it's very important in these kind of dark times to hold on to that sort of hope. It feels pointless what you're doing or whatever, but you might, like, there are people in Pakistan who've been kind of resisting for like decades in like their own little pockets, and they haven't come any closer. They've lost almost everything, but their resistance holds so much together that we can't even realize. And I think it's very important to kind of respect that, acknowledge that, and contribute to that where you can.
So you talked of
Fundamentally,
yeah.
I was just saying that fundamentally we are in India living through the 80s that you guys lived through, the decade of 80s. Very plain, down to earth kind of decade. I don't know when we get that for ourselves, but yeah.
So,
पर अमर, सिंस योर टीम शाहरुख एंड सिंस शाहरुख इज द फ्लेवर ऑफ द सीजन, तो मैं ये बोल रहा था कि हमने ना कई सारे कम से कम 3 एपिसोड किए शाहरुख के ऊपर हमारे पॉडकास्ट में, एंड द टॉपिक हैज बीन कि हाउ शाहरुख एंड ये जो शाहरुख का जो गैंग है,
not really Shahrukh, the
बट
characters he
द
plays.
Shahrukh
कैरेक्टर्स ही
universe,
प्लेज
Shahrukh
हैज
cinematic
हेल्प.
universe.
उस वक्त हमने रियलाइज नहीं करा, बट इट eventually led to the growth of this jingoistic nationalism that is happening in India.
Basically, the jingoistic NRI audience, basically.
If you watch DDLJ now and you see that Amrish Puri, जो कि वहाँ पे एक
He is a Shaka going uncle.
हाँ, Amrish Puri is in RSS for sure. I don't know how much time you'd spend about these things, but I know that these Shah Rukh movies are very popular in Pakistan. इवन लाइक K3G, राइट, जहाँ पे ऋतिक रोशन अपने भाई को ढूंढ रहा है लंदन में और बैकग्राउंड में वंदे मातरम बज रहा है. देयर इज नो रीजन फॉर इट टू हैपन, बट इट इज हैपनिंग. तो कभी कभी कुछ ऐसी चीजें आती है दिमाग में जो मतलब कि किस तरीके से सटली इंडियन नेशनलिज्म घुसाया गया इन सारी चीजों में, और कैसे लेते थे उसको. लाइक कुछ कुछ होता है में जब वो रघुपति राघव राजा राम बज रहा है, जब उन लोग शाहरुख जा रहा है अंजलि से मिलने इंटरवल के बाद.
I think क्या कहते हैं कि there's two things about this. Firstly, कि you know, the media in Pakistan, especially in the 90s, there's very few films coming out, right? So it's really state television. There's one channel, and then there's briefly a second channel, which again is subjected to the same kind of, I guess, like both legal as well as social boundaries that had been established with PTV already. Like I think the big thing on NTM, as the other channel was called, was that they used to play music videos at night, like at around 9:30 or something, and that was like a big thing. Um, so I feel because of that, you were, especially in Pakistan, you were already very exposed to mass media being used as a instrument of nationalism. And one of the most popular dramas around that time, there are two of them actually, Sunehre Din and Alpha Bravo Charlie, which are ISPR productions. But also that, at least in the 90s, if you look at the discography of a lot of bands from that time, everybody did the patriotic song. Because there was a way of, like, coming on television was you also had to do that, especially on 14th August, etc. So I think, like, in that sense, the nationalistic aspect of things was like maybe not that of much of a shocker. That being said, and I think, like, I mean, personally, I did my master's in 2009, and a lot of the work on, not a lot, almost, in fact, 99.9% of all the academic work on South Asian popular cinema has been done by Indians. And so I was, came across a lot of literature, and this idea of the NRI film and the reimagining of the masala film and going away from, like, appealing to the urban working classes towards, like, this sort of NRI middle class kind of audience has been documented a lot well before the BJP have formally came into power. Um, but again, I think, I mean, I feel I have this theory, and I was going to make this point a little later in the podcast, but मैं अभी उसको ले आता हूँ. मैंने अपना मतलब undergrad किया है 2007 बाद में, फिर मैं एक सहाफ़ी, like I worked in a television channel as a journalist. It was like what, for example, post Kargil was for the Indian electronic media. This era was for the Pakistani electronic media. There's all kinds of new channels, and we're really pushing the boundaries. And by, like, the 6th month of my first job, Musharraf had banned all news channels. We used to go to work every day, and it would be transmitted to, like, maybe the 50 people on the planet outside of Pakistan who were subscribing to our channel on, like, really shitty internet. But we still had, point is that this is around that time, and Pakistan in particular, terrorism and military dictatorship and a lot of these things which were quite far removed from your traditional, at a very basic level, liberal democratic way of existing as a country, right? And you look at, like, election ho rahe hain aapke, and there's civilians in power, like, these kind of base level things, regardless of whether you're right, left, socialist, free market, whatever. But that's the kind of framework that the modern world is kind of existing in, right? And there's very few formal theocracies, Pakistan being one of them. और ये भी है कि मतलब, ये military coming into power and everything, that's also kind of gone out of fashion from a lot of places where it used to be fashionable, like Turkey or Brazil or whatever, right? Or Pakistan may be well into the 21st century, we're doing all that. And that around that time, matlab, my undergraduate was kind of political science, amongst other things. Like, there was this thinking, okay, Pakistan really has to, like, we have sustained democracy, and courts become stronger, which was one of the major crises during the end of the Musharraf era. The power, the kind of independence of the courts. all of these things happen, and the country can progress. And look at India, and look at someone like United States, and yeah, they have their problems, but they've had these institutions for so long. And Pakistan's kind of in the past, and these countries are ahead of us. And then, like,
दुआ
in
दुआ
like a
कबूल हो गई दुआ कबूल हो गई है आपकी
नहीं, दुआ नहीं कबूल हुई।
हाँ
वो
मतलब
मतलब पूरा किबला बदल गया, क्योंकि फिर मुझे अंदाजा हुआ कि अब उल्टा हो रहा था, पाकिस्तान फ्यूचर में था और ये सारे हमारे पीछे आ रहे थे, बिकॉज लाइक बिकॉज ये मतलब हमने तो चलो ठीक है, वो डेमोक्रेसी हर 10 साल बाद खत्म हो जाती है, ये था। और शुरू में idea of the state non-contiguous religious theocracy made by seculars. Yeah, there's a lot of problems, right? So like, yeah, okay, stands to reason we have issues. But I go, what the fuck were all these other people doing? We're like having elections every 5 years and have like courts and all that bullshit. And the capitulation was actually kind of stunning. And I think like it really, कि मतलब सबसे पहले था कि ठीक है, या आरएसएस भी है इंडिया में, बीजेपी है, उन्होंने बाबरी मस्जिद तोड़ दी, एक्सेट्रा एक्सेट्रा. But like, I think something like Anupam Kher, like now it's like we've all gone blasé about what an unrepentant
So
asshole he
basically,
is.
I think with social media or right place at the right time, where 10 years of UPA public के अंदर एक feel भी होता है कि हो गया वो सब मिला के,
I mean,
then Modi happened.
I feel it's, yeah, like, I mean, देखो इसमें एक चीज ये है कि the point of telling all that background was कि I think एक गलती जो मुझसे हुई थी और मेरे ख्याल में बहुत सारे लोगों को इंडिया में भी हुई है, कि आप बहुत सारी चीजें इग्नोर कर रहे हैं क्योंकि वो लार्जर, मतलब जैसे कि एक टीम है, वो हर मैच जीत रही है, एंड इन दिस कॉन्टेक्स्ट जीतना मीन्स दैट यू आर एबल टू हैव रेगुलर सिविलियन ट्रांसफर ऑफ पावर, फॉर एग्जांपल। तो वो लाइक फिट है, सब कुछ सही चल रहा है, एंड होता था, मतलब ये बड़े बड़े चुतियापे के ऐसे, शशि थरूर सबसे आगे, मतलब पाकिस्तान ने टॉस हारी क्योंकि उन्होंने इस्लाम पे बना था और इंडिया की सेक्युलरिज्म ने टॉस जीता। शट द फक अप ब्रो। उस वो किस्म का, मतलब ना बिल्कुल ब्लैक एंड व्हाइट वो चला जाता, और ऑब्वियसली इट सूटेड पीपल ऑन बोथ एंड, बट दे समथिंग, फॉर एग्जांपल, आई रिमेंबर प्री मोदी व्हेन आई हर्ड अबाउट इट, आई वाज काइंड लाइक व्हाट द फक, वाज Indira Gandhi, after like the 71 war and everything settles, at the Red Fort in Delhi made a statement that we've avenged like, I don't know, 800 years or 1,000 years of oppression. And I was like, what?
अरे ये तो
Indira Gandhi?
ये तो बहुत ही
ये
कॉमन, बहुत कॉमन है। सो
Yeah,
तो
yeah.
अहमद, फिर सारा प्रॉब्लम यहीं से तो शुरू होता है अहमद। लेकिन आज की डेट में जितना ये, सो बेसिकली इफ यू लुक एट वॉट एवर इंडिया इज डूइंग in terms of their politics, in terms of how we react to losing to Pakistan in cricket.
बेसिकली एक आज का बाबर है, एक वो बाबर था
नहीं, पर
उसके बीच में
हाँ, everything is basically there is this inferiority complex under which we work, और वो inferiority complex क्यों है, उसके कई सारे reasons, उसके बारे में मैंने बहुत सोचा है, और उसके बारे में अभी
I
theorize नहीं
feel
करना चाह रहा हूँ।
I actually just because आप लोग ने मुझे जब वो DM किया था about talk about the episode and you given me some pointers, so I was just thinking about what I'll be talking about. And so like one thing that like what I wanted to link to, because I think ये pandemic के दौरान there was multiple books, but like I think if I'm going to one which is most relevant here, actually two are for the first one is by this Pakistani historian called Manan Ahmed. Manan used to run this very famous pre-Twitter and also during Twitter blog called Chapati Mystery. And there's a bunch of people who used to write on it from both sides of the border. And he's written this book called Chachnama, a Book of Conquest. Basically, it goes back to Muhammad bin Qasim, who is quote unquote, the first Muslim to come to the subcontinent, and therefore where Pakistani history
Founder
begins.
of Pakistan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Manan basically shows that based on reading the texts that record Muhammad bin Qasim's actual journey and progress and everything, he is basically copy pasting from the works of this Hindu king who had taken power in Sindh, like from the but he was the king before this king that Muhammad bin Qasim had. And I'm really, I think, fucking up a lot of the details. So I, please just look this up. But by Manan Ahmed, And basically, the point being that what A firstly shows that actually the way we look at Muhammad bin Qasim now is not at all how Muhammad bin Qasim and his contemporaries are looking at the world. And B, he then goes on to show that, you have basically when the British come here and they're colonizing us and everything, and then they start translating history books that had existed in the subcontinent, they are translating them upon अपनी मर्जी से कर रहे हैं, और मतलब उसमें they're translating the parts where they're talking about breaking an idol or something, but they're not translating something else. And they essentially, which is obviously something that's set to the point of a cliche, कि वो कितना divide and conquer के मकसद के लिए ये सब कुछ हो रहा था. But I think it really, that book, and Manan is doing a lot of other things in that book. I'm just kind of reducing it to a very kind of one paragraph description. But uske baad, then I read his book by this historian Richard Easton, and it's called India in the Persianate Age. And basically, he makes a very, very convincing argument that it's not Islam versus Hinduism and all of that. It's that not just linguistically, but there's like a culture and a way of courtly etiquette and a way of political thinking and war around a language. And basically, in around like the year kind of from the 10th century, the Sanskrit world, which spans from like the Indian subcontinent all the way down to South Asia, is coming into contact with the Persianate world, which is like Persia and Central Asia, like both the north and the west of the subcontinent, and that brings with it a lot of changes in not just the language and or religion, etc. Like there's a lot of non the non-Muslims who are completely adopt Persianate courtly etiquette or titles or culture, etc., etc. And so basically, जो हमारे लिए confusion है कि एक तरफ हमेशा से एक दूसरे से लड़ते आ रहे हैं. You find a lot of examples in history of like how much Hindus and Muslims are killing each other, and yet at the same time there's this syncretism, and it's very confusing. I think for me, like these books really, really kind of cleared it up, right? So, for example, I wasn't aware of this history, but like when Shivaji, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right,
Yeah.
जो मराठास का जो ruler था,
ये
at
है
some point
रेसिडेंट
they make
मराठा है आदित्य.
अभी
so
सबके लिए मोदी जी बोल सकते हैं, सब
तो ठीक है,
इंटरचेंजेबल है.
when he's allying with the Mughals, and he shows up at court and he does this like bada drama at court, and it's like this long, he's playing his own games and whatever. But the Rajputs there, who are also not Muslims, are very offended by his lack of, he's not speaking Persian correctly and he doesn't know how to address the emperor, etc., etc. And so or when like Mahmud of Ghazni on Somnath, when like they actually look at the records of the temples, it actually shows that the temple keepers are far more worried about this other king from the, I don't know, Vijayanagar Empire somewhere. I'm again, please do not quote me. You can look up these books and get the exact details. But basically, that they
नहीं
were
अब तो
far more
गया.
worried about like other Hindu kings who were like who had been were bigger dangers, because one of the in as he explains in the Sanskrit kind of world view, one of the ways that you asserted power was like the temple was the seat of royal power, and so when you took over another piece of land, the first thing you destroyed was the temple, because it meant that the previous political entity's power was now ended, right? Um, so this was like, I mean, really kind of major eureka moment for me, because then I was like, oh, okay, this is what's happening, and that's where it comes back to the whole Pakistan in the future thing, because I feel a lot of things that are happening in India right now, like we've grown up with this shit, like what Bain कहता है कि you just experienced darkness. I was born in it. I was molded by it. Like that's Pakistan to like Brexit UK and Modi India and Trump America. Like, yeah, guys, welcome to the future. You'll love it here.
maybe she's born with it,
वो
maybe it's dictatorship.
वो जेम्स फ्रैंको का मीम है ना, फर्स्ट टाइम.
Yeah,
पर
exactly. First time, huh?
पहले का ये तरीका था, राइट? इफ यू कॉन्कर अ लैंड, यू डिसेक्रेट द प्लेस ऑफ देयर वर्शिप टू असर्ट योर अथॉरिटी.
I mean, as
इसके ऊपर
that historian says, pehle ka very specifically with like a worldview associated with a certain kind of linguistic culture, and a certain time and place in India. Matlab, there is a logic behind how cultures operate, right? And that's where, like if you look at, for example, the Iraq invasion in 2003, the Americans made sure that you saw it on, as I don't know if अगर उस वक्त high definition TV था आ गया था या नहीं, but जो भी था, like you had front row seats to the bombardment of Baghdad, and that in this day and age is that's how you show power, like, and I think they took down that statue of Saddam or whatever. So like yeah, like these are specific kind of logics also with certain places and ideas, and as he says, like a whole worldview.
I mean, 99 में जब कारगिल होता है तो there is this famous interview by Barkha Dutt of Vikram Batra where he says ये दिल मांगे मोर, right, which became like an icon of that war. But something that always kind of makes me chuckle is war, religion, nationalism और capitalism, क्योंकि ये दिल मांगे मोर तब पेप्सी का स्लोगन हुआ करता था. सबका एक अजीब तरीके का मिक्स होता है. और पर अमर ये बताओ यार कि आपका कोक स्टूडियो पाकिस्तान इतना बुरा क्यों? कोक स्टूडियो इंडिया जैसे कैसे बन सकता है कोक स्टूडियो पाकिस्तान? क्या करना पड़ेगा उसके लिए?
ब्रो, वंस अगेन आपको लग रहा है कि आप एक अच्छी चीज और बुरी चीज डिस्क्राइब कर रहे हैं, और मे बी राइट और लेफ्ट डिस्क्राइब कर रहे हैं, बट यू आर रियली जस्ट डिस्क्राइबिंग द फ्यूचर. लाइक कोक स्टूडियो as just, I think, I did a bunch of threads on this, and then actually had an argument with the only guy whose Coke Studio work I'd respected a lot more. And it's not that Coke Studio is bad; it does great stuff, but it's kind of sad that, like, it's all these years हो गए हैं, जितने साल मतलब मैंने पाकिस्तानी pop music, जो mainstream music जो है, not what is the one that happens in Urdu mostly, and some Punjabi and some English, and the ones that is consumed elsewhere outside of the regional music, like that has never existed as an industry. And so Coke Studio for Pakistan at least is, I think the reason that it doesn't work in India is because in India, Coke Studio is not the end all and be all of your career as a musician. And that's the truth in Pakistan. And there's very limited slots available, and there's, it's just, that's how it is. And so I guess if you want to destroy your existing music industry and have it controlled completely by brand managers, then maybe you might have a better Coke Studio India.
Coke Studio का मेरा theory है कि Coke Studio India will never work. If you want to start, you have to have Coke Studio Tamil, Coke Studio Bengali,
exactly,
Coke Studio. So if you focus on regional language music, that is one way to make Coke Studio in India work.
The better episodes of Coke Studio India are always those which have like either Punjabi folk or Rajasthani folk. They have the cult following kind of.
एक चीज मैं कुछ मैंने नोट्स लिखे थे, कुछ आई डोंट नो.
वैसे भी कुछ सालों बाद एक बहुत ही सनसनाता हुआ सेगवे आ रहा है वैसे.
क्या बोल
बता देता, मतलब वैसे भी
कोक स्टूडियो संस्कृत
नहीं, वैसे भी 25 साल बाद तो सब कुछ.
अच्छा, हाँ, वो
रॉयल म्यूजिक ऑफ लंदन भी चला जाएगा.
हाँ, ये तो अहमर, आपको ये पता है क्या कि जो
हमारे इंडिया के व्हाट्सएप पे जो ऑब्वियसली रियल न्यूज आती है,
उसके थ्रू ये
अकॉर्डिंग ये पता चला हमें कि इंडिया का जो इंडिपेंडेंस है वो 99 इयर्स की लीज पे था, और 24 साल बाद जो है हम लोगों को
ये न्यूज़ पहुंचेगी नहीं पाकिस्तान.
वो जिन्ना साहब ने भी साइन किया था, या वो सिर्फ हमारे लिए ही है? मतलब
बेसिकली ये सीन है ना, यहाँ के राइट विंग ने ये फैलाया है कि नेहरू बेसिकली फ्रीडम मूवमेंट का कोई हिस्सा नहीं था. नेहरू ने डील साइन किया था ब्रिटिश के साथ, और माउंटबेटन ने उसके साथ डील किया था कि 99 इयर्स के बाद में ब्रिटिश के पास वापस चला जाएगा इंडिया. तो ऐसा कोई सीन पाकिस्तान का भी है? डिड जिन्ना साइन समथिंग?
आई थिंक जिन्ना ने सब लीज साइन की थी, तो फिर मतलब जो है ना, हम लैंडलॉर्ड होंगे और जो है किराया ज्यादातर उन्हीं को जाएगा, बट यू हैव टू डील विद अस. सो दैट्स
फाइनली ज़ैद हामिद का सपना भी पूरा होगा कि नहीं?
या सर, आप डाउट कर देते हैं यार, ये आप पे लानत है. अगर
आज के बहुत दिनों से क्यों खबर नहीं, पता नहीं कहाँ है वो आजकल, दिखते नहीं है बहुत दिनों से.
Again, not well versed. Once he was arrested in Saudi Arabia and all of that stuff, उसके बाद से I think like that whole equilibrium has not returned to its former optimum kind of space.
If you are a Hindu living in India, you cannot escape the contribution that the subcontinental Muslims have made to everything that is in India. It be your language, it be your architecture, everything. और वो चीज इतनी ज्यादा खटकती है लोगों को. You know, Hammer, you know, right, that Taj Mahal was actually a mandir, right?
तेजो
Yeah,
महल.
तेजो
Taju
महल.
Melo, Tejo Mahal. Sorry, yeah, sorry.
नहीं, ताजो महल नहीं, तेजो महल. ताजो
तेजो
महल नहीं,
महल
तेजो
मुझे
और
पता
महल.
लगा कि महल भी जो है वो उर्दू ही वर्ड है, बट तेजो महल कुछ तो भी चाहिए बस.
और बिरयानी जो है, बिरयानी के पीछे का स्टोरी ये है कि एक रानी थी जिसका नाम था बिरा रानी, और, और वो फिर चुरा लिया बाकियों ने, अप्रोप्रिएट कर लिया उस कल्चर को.
तो
Yeah, so
हम.
I mean, ye basically ye jo I really don't want to sound like a condescending prick, but I
अरे
realize
प्लीज डू,
प्लीज डू.
प्लीज डू. We
that's
do
the
that all the
but
time.
like you know कि ये genre तो हमारा मतलब बहुत ही perfected है कि जो बोस्निया में जब मुसलमान लड़ रहे थे, तो वो ये मेरे ad maths के teacher was otherwise like a pretty secular kind of guy and was like कि वो लड़ रहे थे और उनके साथ उन्होंने देखा कि फरिश्ते साथ दौड़ रहे हैं और गोलियां आ रही हैं तो फरिश्ते रोक रहे हैं उन गोलियों को, और क्या कहते हैं कि like almost every Pakistani Islamist party as in like जो religious politics क्या कहे theological politics करते हैं, तो उन ऑलमोस्ट सबके फाउंडर को ख्वाब में रसूल अल्लाह या कोई ऐसे फिगर आए और उन्होंने कहा कि ब्रो पाकिस्तान का सीन ऑन है, उन्होंने कहा ठीक है पाकिस्तान का
गेम ऑन
सीन
है,
ऑन है,
पाकिस्तान का गेम ऑन है.
क्योंकि I mean obviously because Pakistan was the all India Muslim League and these were all kinds of sharabi kababi types. There's a lot of Ahmadis in it, which ironically बेचारों उन्होंने ही मुल्क बनवाया और फिर उनको ही completely
हाँ.
legally de-Muslim declared किया, and just so much kind of violence enacted legally and then obviously socially. And I think that's actually the scary thing, Pakistani centrists who are always like India's on a worse trajectory, blah blah blah. I think the scary thing that's the difference between Pakistan and then places like India or even the US or okay, the state is so much more competent. And I don't want to say that it is a competent state. I'm just saying relatively, it's been around for longer and it's had its functions at these like basic like holding elections and doing the census and having like healthcare units or whatever. Um, that basically, जब ये वाले systems have gone towards fascism, it's happened so much more rapidly. Like is just like that momentum builds up so much quicker. Whereas like in a country where the state itself has like it's limited to how much it is able to kind of control society. It's crazier stuff can still be kind of skirted in certain ways, and I think that's the big difference.
But yeah, this is a very fair point, right? What happened in Pakistan when it comes to like the Ahmadiyya community or even the Shia community, and the surprising thing is that, and I don't want to get into that subject today because that's a whole different kind of subject. But something that always fascinates me is how the Sunnification of Jinnah, and then this guy Bhutto, who was, as you said, शराबी कबाबी, like वो कहते हैं ना, जीवे जीवे भुट्टो और पीवे पीवे भी भुट्टो, और वो बंदा determines who ends up being called a Muslim versus who does not.
I mean, देखो जैसे कि ये आपको ना ये भुट्टो, yes, obviously, I think like there'll be a lot of people who will be accusing me of one thing or another, but I think the context of both those questions, like this Ahmadi thing is a very specifically South Asian theological dispute and almost very largely restricted to the Punjab in both sides of the border. But it had been in a kind of, like one of the things, particularly in India, like the Punjab has a very different kind of a trajectory. But in Pakistan, like a lot of the pre-partition communal tensions of India and of Indian Punjab and how they affected the language and the kind of urbanity of the province is not really discussed that much or understood that much. But ये था कि पाकिस्तान जब मतलब basically बनता है and it has to kind of figure out how to define itself. It has to do that in the context of the fact that the people who were specifically asking for this have no electoral base in what is now Pakistan. In fact, the provinces that become Pakistan, other than East Pakistan that goes on to become Bangladesh, none of them really wanted to be in Pakistan, right? Like, not KPK was Khudai Khidmatgar, Congress through and through. Punjab was unionist. Sindh again was like nationalist parties. और शुरू तो उनको समझ नहीं आता कि अच्छा आप ये किस तरीके से जो आप define करें और फिर the only thing was like कि भाई जो up until the Mughal Empire and the kind of Persianate way of being, there was a distinct advantage to being from these elite backgrounds, and because of the British prejudice, it was much harder for there's a great historian Hamza Alvi, which everyone should read for Pakistan, understanding the Pakistan movement, and it's basically these Muslim elites from like the heartland of UP and northern India and all that had most of the civil posts, and then when they switch from Persian to English, they lose a lot of that prestige, and basically they're just trying to ensure that they get that back, and they end up with an entire country. And once you have to define that country, the only thing you were fighting for was like your exceptionalism, and so you define it by in terms of Islam, and this vague kind of understanding. And basically last week something that happened that's been happening for 70 years, because what happens is that अभी हुआ है कि there's this group called the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, which is marching up to the province, to the capital, and they killed like 8 policemen or something, and then they eventually come to halt, and then there's this negotiation happens, and we still haven't been told what was agreed to it. But basically, this happens quite regularly that like people with like on the religious right can just use mob violence and whatever, and the government, the state basically knows that it can't really outmaneuver this, so then it looks to kind of absorb that point of view into its fold, and when it does that, it obviously becomes more rightward, and that's kept happening for all these kind of decades, and that you see that with every single kind of political dispensation in Pakistan. तो उसमें आपका वही हो जाता है कि because आप उसको like in Bhutto, for example, post the secession makes this attempt to try and imagine a different kind of definition for Pakistan, but it is like a challenging one to come up with when everyone has it's a very heterogeneous kind of a place, and its reason of Islam had just you just lost half the country and whatever. So I think that dilemma really determines all the ethnic kind of clampdowns in Pakistan, the state going rightward. So like right, for example, you have TLP, you also have the TTP, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and they basically went a step further, right? And they just took up arms and said, "Okay, we're establishing our own writ." And then you kind of had this really long bloody war with them, and um at various points, like throughout the kind of 2000s of Musharraf era, and afterwards also, they keep making peace deals, and they keep like there's lots of pictures of like the army and like the militants like putting garlands on each other, etc. So again, that same treatment is not meted out to people who are resisting and have organized around ethnic bases, or have organized around linguistic bases, have organized around class bases. Like those oppositions have been dealt with brutally, absolutely brutally, with like disappearances, murders, just abhi bhi matlab abhi kuch, aaj bhi aap meri timeline dekhein, I've retweeted about like this activist in Sindh who was abducted and murdered. So that the only people that can kind of bring that state around are that, because of the way it's being defined. And I think once that's kind of what you see, like for example, अभी जैसे इंडिया में आप वो देखते हो ना कि वो मॉब वायलेंस हो रहा है और ये लिंचिंग हो रही है और ये वो, और फिर उसके बाद वही बंदा एमपीए बन रहा है, एक्सेट्रा. So like it is that once you start lurching that way and you're defining yourself within this kind of definition, then people who are defining themselves even more extremely can do whatever the fuck they like, and the state will just have to kind of embrace them, and in the process itself move further towards the right.
मतलब इंडिया में भी यही हुआ है ना, मतलब इफ यू थिंक अबाउट लाइक यू वर गिविंग दैट इंदिरा गांधी एग्जांपल, पर उस 80s में व्हेन राजीव गांधी बिकम्स द प्राइम मिनिस्टर, ही इज द वन हु goes and opens the gate of the disputed structure in Ayodhya, and shows this. There is this whole Shah Bano thing that happens where because he has now done
Basically,
Ayodhya, so he
they
tries to
made
pacify
the
it the other way.
yeah.
Yeah.
और उसके बाद धीरे धीरे द स्टेट whoever was in power tried to keep co-opting whatever to its right was. और धीरे like at one point I remember people, like even in like 2010 11 around that time, people would laugh if someone would say that Modi prime minister banega, because somehow people thought कि India में इतना tainted आदमी को like they will not elect. But now it's not. Modi is, there are groups who see Modi as the liberal figure, and there are people like, forget Yogi,
Yeah.
you were talking about, like there is this person who called Pragya Thakur, who's also a very famous Garba singer,
Also a basketballer.
and first lady IPS officer of India, all in one. But she's a terror accused, and she's a member of parliament now.
Like not just accused, videos of her acknowledging her own crimes are there, but yeah, she's a member of parliament.
पर हमारे डिक्टेटरशिप में भी हम इतने लाइक सेक्युलर भी हो जाते हैं कभी कभी. So Amar, you know that there is this thing in Hinduism about reincarnation, right? Do you know कि मोदी जी अपने पिछले जन्म में क्या थे? सर सैयद अहमद खान थे मोदी जी.
Why?
There is a whole
आज तक
1 hour of news bulletin on Aaj Tak that was about how Sir Sayyid Ahmad Khan died and was born again as Modi. So I don't know
Why?
if that is kind of the
why दाढ़ी
Why?
सिमिलर
Why were
है.
they looking?
हाँ बताओ आदित्य.
That is
दाढ़ी सिमिलर है, ये पहला था. चेहरा वैसे मिलता है उनका. फिर दूसरा था कि दोनों ही सोशल रिफॉर्मर हैं. मतलब मोदी इज सोशल रिफॉर्मर बाय द वे.
so अब वो भाई सोशली नहीं रहेगा कुछ तो रिफॉर्म हो ही जाएगा ना,
हो ही
कुछ
जाएगा.
मतलब कुछ रहेगा ही नहीं रिफॉर्म करने
ऐसे
के
कुछ तो
लिए.
था, मतलब ऐसे लेम सा कोई पैरेलल ड्रॉ किया था उन्होंने उसमें.
एक्चुअली मोदी जी बहुत टाइम से, जैसे बंगाल इलेक्शन के समय उनकी दाढ़ी टैगोर जैसी हो गई थी, तो अब वो दैट डिडंट स्टिक बिकॉज दे
बट अभी
लॉस्ट.
कोई
अभी कुछ और से वो करना है, तो
बट
हाँ अभी इलेक्शन भी नहीं चल रहा है, तो
नहीं,
कैसे करें.
इलेक्टोरल मजबूरी नहीं है ना, लेकिन
सर सैयद अहमद खान के नाम पे कोई वोट नहीं देगा ना इंडिया में.
वोट नहीं देगा
पर
ना.
हो
Yeah.
सकता है. Those who believe in Modi, it's a cult basically, and this cult will go to any length to justify anything. So for example, अब मुझे नहीं पता कि अभी पाकिस्तान में पेट्रोल के प्राइसेस क्या चल रहे हैं, पर इंडिया में पेट्रोल के प्राइसेस इंडिया के T20 के मैचेस के स्कोर से काफी ज्यादा रहते हैं पर लीटर.
बेसिकली व्हाट हैज बीन हैपनिंग
एक्चुअली
इज दैट
पाकिस्तान में पेट्रोल के प्राइसेस पाकिस्तान की T20 स्कोर्स के मुताबिक चल रहे हैं. So we can take that joke for once, guys. You don't have to do it.
नो बिकॉज इधर पे वो जो कल्ट की हालत ये है कि कल तक जो लोग डिफेंड कर रहे थे कि मतलब रैंडम कि ये इंटरनेशनल फैक्टर्स हैं और वैक्सीन भी बनानी है, फ्री में देनी है, तो टैक्स बढ़ रहा है इसलिए पेट्रोल आज आज जस्ट बिकॉज दिवाली एंड ब्ला 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 दे हैव स्लैश प्राइसेस बेसिकली फॉर द पास्ट फ्यू मंथ्स. वो बढ़ बढ़ के 7 मतलब 50 रुपए बढ़ गए हैं और आज 5 रुपए कम हो गए हैं, और उसको भी डिफेंड कर रहे हैं लोग.
बेसिकली आर्गुमेंट ये मिलता है कि शेर पाला है तो उतना महंगा
हाँ
खर्चा
ये
तो
ये
उठाएगा.
आर्ग्यूमेंट है कि ये बेसिकली शेयर टैक्स है कि अगर राहुल गांधी होता तो वो चूहा होता तो उसके लिए नहीं लगता टैक्स.
Yeah. I mean, I think मतलब ये सारी ये जो मैं बात कर रहा था पाकिस्तान फ्यूचर में जो कुछ भी, like I feel one of the things that's kind of created, not just in me, I think a lot of people, is this kind of profound disillusionment. I think democracy, particularly in like free market economies, जो दुनिया का एक स्टैंडर्ड है, बिकॉज जो आपने चेक्स एंड बैलेंसेस सोच के रखे हुए थे वो कि आई थिंक दैट्स वेयर फॉर मी, लाइक आई यूज्ड टू थिंक ओके पाकिस्तान में जो एजुकेशन सिस्टम है इट्स वेरी लाइक वेरी 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 clearly stating out like a ideological agenda, and like there's so much censorship and very little kind of popular expression is allowed unfettered, and places that allow for that and are doing that and whatever will therefore necessarily have like much stronger kind of checks and balances. But I think that was something like, I mean, in a week, I think for anyone, if you were to say, okay, not only would Indians be turning not maybe en masse, but still like Shah Rukh Khan would be getting fucked by the Indian state in the same week that like a sizable population is asking to not support the Indian cricket team in a World Cup is like, I think, not something anyone would have imagined, and I think that's something that's what I'm saying, like there's that the profound disillusionment, because you would feel for whatever else, like there would have been certain, these institutions would have worked in certain ways and people would have thought certain things. but it's very clear that it's very, very rapidly you can change that or kind of activate these latent kind of, insecurities and fears and whatever. Because I think कोई आपको अमेरिका जैसे देखते हैं तो उसमें मतलब 2008 और 12 में they elect Obama, and then they immediately revert to like someone like Trump. So like that kind of volatility is kind of there. But in ultimately, like both end up, वही कि हर जगह आपको more or less right wing ही options मिल रही होती हैं, right? Like थोड़ा सा
It's just
कम
that
right wing है
in the
या
US systems are still able to withstand a Trump.
I
So
mean, I don't
more
know,
or
like,
less.
आप ये भी कह रहे हैं, but like because Biden won it, but they still haven't figured out if like attacking the fucking Capitol and trying to overturn the election is a good thing or a bad thing.
But at least the media is covering it the right way. All those people who like people who are still in Congress, Republicans who are still in Congress, are being named and shamed in mainstream media.
To me, I feel you do that's you've crossed a major Rubicon, sort of see, right? Like, yeah, sure, maybe America is not as bad as India, which is not as bad as X or Y or whatever, but I think by and large, the systems that the kind of post World War II order had envisioned, yeah, maybe the post kind of 70s or whatever, that is just clearly not working the way it was intended to. To various degrees, it's failing, but it
Yeah,
is
that's
failing
true.
without a doubt.
I mean, compared to US and India, US का as Nishant was saying, right, institutional integrity फिर भी है.
Like
इंडिया में
even
तो
Trump के appointed judges are
हाँ,
ruling
इंडिया में तो
against him and things
मीडिया
like
से
that. So
लेकर सुप्रीम कोर्ट से लेकर सभी एवरी डे दे शो यू हाउ इनकेपेबल दे आर एंड हाउ बेसिकली इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैव नो इंडिपेंडेंस एट ऑल. लाइक अगर आज मोदी आके बोल देता है कि बहुत पैसा खर्चा हुआ है कोविड में और अगले 10 साल अभी इलेक्शन नहीं कराते हैं, मैं ही प्राइम मिनिस्टर रहूंगा, आई थिंक large section of the media and judiciary and all would even be okay with that. अभी मैं पेट्रोल की बात कर रहा था, एक मिनिस्टर ने प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस में ये बोला कि 95% इंडियंस को पेट्रोल की जरूरत ही नहीं, हम पेट्रोल पेट्रोल क्यों कर रहे हैं. इमेजिन दैट, लाइक इमेजिन सेइंग दैट इन पब्लिक इन अ प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस एंड गोइंग अवे विदाउट एनी स्क्रूटनी. ये हाल है इंडिया में.
पेट्रोल वगैरह तो तब भी अब एक चीज है, but like for me at least one thing that really stood out was demonetization, right? Like that was kind of insane because you read like I've never heard of anything like that in anywhere in the world in my lifetime, and it was clearly by all accounts a very difficult process, and yet it had absolutely no negative impact as far
अरे
as at least बाहर से जो
my
नजर आ रहा है.
my own family members who are bhakts, they literally matlab they were struggling, but because of their privilege they were able to get their notes exchanged, yeah, and they were all like कि oh हाँ अब तो काला पैसा गया. ये literally ये बात करते करते they are also still not taking receipts from the shopkeeper because tax नहीं देना पड़ेगा और सस्ता पड़ेगा.
Yeah, it's that
It's
part
I
is
don't know
like
what.
kind of that was I thought the craziest thing.
So yeah, Emmer, you mentioned about this, like certain things that give a lot of joy, right? So one of those things for us growing up has been Indian cricket, right? You need these, like at least these domains of benign expression of nationalism or tribalism or whatever. So all of us grew up. I think I can speak for myself at least, like to be that cricket fan who would not read newspapers for a couple of days when India lost. At least in the late 90s and early
Yeah,
2000s. From then to now, we have come a long way
That's why I was
where
really dumb during that era of my life because I never used to read newspapers.
so cut to the World Cup this year, this T20 World Cup, we at least to an extent we were all rooting for Pakistan to win that game
You
against
mean the
India.
three of us?
The
The three
three
of
of
us.
us, the three of us, that game against India because of all that went around it, right? Like the Moka Moka
ये
ad campaign
इट्स बीन
and
सच अ रोलर कोस्टर ना. मेरे साथ तो ऐसा हो गया कि मैं क्रिकेट एंजॉय ही नहीं कर पा रहा हूँ. इंडियन फैंस बिहेविंग ऑब्नॉक्शियसली तो मैं पाकिस्तान को सपोर्ट कर रहा हूँ. पाकिस्तान फैंस आर बिहेविंग ऑब्नॉक्शियसली तो मैं अफगानिस्तान को सपोर्ट कर रहा हूँ. यही चल रहा है मेरे
and
साथ.
and and it all reached a peak for us as cricket fans. Like we had lost that sort of partisan interest in the game a while back, but at least till that Gabba test earlier this year and the Australia tour, I think cricket fandom seemed to be at the peak for us. Like we supported the
mm,
side, it was an underdog
mm,
story, and everything that followed after that, right? The tweets happened, then the Shami
रिहाना
incident happened, the Wasim Jafar incident happened. So all that happened after that. I think there is this sense of disillusionment in all of us right now, like while following this side, and that is something which I haven't been able to articulate, and something we are all grappling with. Right? Cricket still means a lot to us. So what does it mean to be a cricket fan in such an environment, and how do you view your equation with the Pakistan side, or has it never changed for you?
I think, I was this friend of mine was saying that, if you're truly progressive in Pakistan, like how can you support the Pakistan cricket team? Because like it is a very much a reflection of the state. It is it in its composition has always reflected what parts of the country are most plugged into the state in terms of access to resources and the politics of it and all of that stuff. So historically it used to be like the elite of Karachi and Lahore, and then a kind of small town Punjab, and then क्या कहते हैं, in the last kind of couple of decades, like from the Pashtun belt, and so on and so forth. So I think, and obviously there's a lot of jingoism allowed with it. In fact, the all the times India has toured Pakistan has been during military rule, because like the kind of excitement and everything around it, and the whole kind of implicit peace overtures can only be made during that time. So I think it's always been very complicated. Like, I think, I mean, it also comes down to like who's a Pakistani. And I think for me, like it's actually been reversed, where like a lot of times, like for example, I'm Shia Muslim, right? So like for a lot of other people, and especially older people, my parents as well, like they have no idea of like of this a sectarian Pakistan so much on the a sectarian where Shiaism is in peril. But the Pakistan that I grew up in was hostile to it, and has gotten further more and more hostile. And so, like, in those moments, like, you don't feel like you're part of that Pakistani. And there's a lot of millions of Pakistanis who are feel.
I was just saying, are there Pakistanis in Pakistan who support India during an India-Pakistan game? धीरे से पूछ रहा हूँ.
Yes, yeah, क्या कहते हैं, that's like, I'm sure they're nationalists of other kind of movements or whatever, people who resisting the Pakistani state, if they're into cricket, might be into doing that. But मैं जो बात ही कर रहा था कि basically आपके पास जब cricket team एक ऐसा लम्हा होता है जिसमें a lot of people who might otherwise not be able to join, to be able to identify it as Pakistani or whatever, are able to get in on that moment of collective joy, right? And I think, like, as I witnessed it in 1992 and then in 2009, uh, that the way that people celebrated, there's a very kind of, it's the only kind of moments in my life where I've seen a lot of the barriers that exist in Pakistan on a day-to-day basis, on gender, the women out in the streets, or on class, or on ethnicity or whatever, like those kind of break down for a little while. So I think, at least in Pakistan, if you felt like, that there's perhaps, like, as I said, the definition is narrow. Like, regardless of India, the actual experience, I think you should speak to people, people who are minorities in India who can say that. But at least from afar, it feels like, okay, the definition is based on this kind of secular ideal or whatever. So it's technically easier for people, a wider range of people, to identify with it. Whereas in Pakistan, it's been narrower, and it keeps getting narrower. So, like, the cricket team becomes something that doesn't have to be defined so narrowly. It becomes something that you can appreciate. But yeah, at the same time, like, it is very much an instrument of nationalism and jingoism. And in that way, it's been great that Pakistan, a team like Pakistan, can never be adopted or supported by a fascist state, because it's too volatile. No conception of fascism can allow for such volatility, where, like, something that
Mercurial.
rep-
Remember, you mean
yeah,
mercurial.
all of that, like, वो एक यही, I think that is the saving grace, because abhi right now Pakistan has its full share of obnoxious kind of followers. Like, I did a really mean tweet in the morning, and I felt maybe I should delete it, but like, Kumail Nanjiani, like, has said that go Pakistan, and
हाँ, go Pakistan. हाँ.
I don't want to be an asshole about it, but it really feels like this is peak bandwagonism, right? Like, oh, the Pakistan cricket team is fashionable right now. Like, where were you when we were losing to,
अरे
scheduling matches
बन
against Zimbabwe to make it to the Champions Trophy
आई
qualification?
मीन
And
बंदे की परसों मूवी रिलीज हो रही है यार मार्वल वाली तो या
so
सो
yeah, so I mean, वो आपका उस तरीके में Pakistan team being so incompetent also really helped. Whereas like I mean, right now I think the sad part about being an Indian cricket fan, if I say so, and not being one, is that अब वो आप पूरे हर टूर्नामेंट में scheduling भी आपकी मर्जी से होती है और
Exactly.
ग्रुप्स भी आपकी मर्जी से बनते हैं और रूल्स भी आपकी मर्जी से होते हैं और उसके बावजूद आप एक दो को जीत भी नहीं रहे हैं और फिर क्या कहते हैं कि मतलब आपका प्लेयर भी और चूतिया से चूतिया वो हरकतें कर रहे होते हैं like it's like someone like Kohli can be so amazing when he's like dealing with Pakistani players and etc. And yet he's like up to like all kinds of stupid bullshit as a captain. Just being such a this is like really take and he's a product. Obviously, the board has treated, for example, the media the way the BCCI has been so, and the rest of the cricketing world for such a long time. So it's not a surprise that Kohli is also a product of that. But point being, I think that's what makes fandom difficult. I think like like I've been thinking again, lockdown ke waqt or last dance aayi thi or
Hmm.
because I've been working in cricket. Like like I've been we were a bunch of journalists were having this discussion. Like I really hate cricket. Like it's just the way that I used to enjoy it as a fan is just impossible to go back to that because once you're behind the curtain, like you're just that illusion is broken. And so one of the things that I kind of happened naturally, but like I've been really started following American sports and I felt that one of the reasons that they're so great to follow is that they really perfected what I think is at the heart of every sport, which is कि आप वो ना उससे हमेशा एक narrative generate कर रहे होते हैं. And it's
ये हमारा एक पेट पीव है ऑफ एयर
um,
बोलता हूँ मैं
I mean I know like a lot of people are like कि analyze गलत हो रहा है ये वो but जो
एग्जैक्टली
analyze भी जिस तरीके
एग्जैक्टली
से कर रहे हैं वो भी एक narrative है right because
या
there is क्या कहते हैं कि like the very act of making meaning out of a leather ball hitting a wooden stick that you're already agreeing to a whole bunch of unnecessary like silly things because you
दिस इज
want
लाइक
to
लिटरली
process
आवर
the narrative in
डिस्कशन
a
ऑन
certain way you want to
आवर
process
लास्ट एपिसोड
yeah, like for example, कि अब वो आसिफ अगर करा रहा है तो I want to believe that आसिफ ने 14 बॉलें लक्ष्मण को आउटस्विंग करा के फिर इनस्विंग कराई. That's the narrative I'm invested in. And my
या
mother is like ये इतना मुस्कुरा क्यों रहा है इसको पता नहीं है कि ये हारने वाला है like but that's what it is right like everyone's drawing narrative and I think Americans are brilliant absolutely brilliant at how they generate narrative around it and I've tried to like तो उसमें बेसिकली एक चीज मैं यही सोच रहा था कि अब जैसे आप अगर आई डोंट नो इफ यू गाइस फॉलो अमेरिकन स्पोर्ट्स बट जजिंग फ्रॉम द sunlight you live in that part of the world so
या
that क्या कहते हैं कि अगर आप जैसे न्यू इंग्लैंड पेट्रियट्स के फैन हैं क्या मजा आ रहा है आपको लाइफ में like bro I'm surprised you're not a Sangi then
बॉस्टन
like that's
No, no, I mean, I live in Boston. Like, fan
sure
as in
sure
not really a fan. I absolutely hate
but
Red
yeah,
Sox,
like
but
okay, there's
come on, man. I mean,
it's I
Brady
remember there
was
was a
quite something.
video
So, yeah.
after fuck that, bro. But there's a video I saw after the Eagles beat the Patriots, and there's this child in a Patriots uniform, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we lost," and then he's like, "Well, it's okay. We've already got six." I go, ऐसी चूतिया से उसने बात की ना और मतलब मेरे वही था कि I mean yeah like I think that's something it's you either need to become a complete dickhead to keep finding interesting narrative in a team offering you the exact same storyline year after year or you kind of have to do these convoluted things to find some kind of joy in it versus everybody else's teams are just offering enough drama and kind of excitement and tragedy and whatever to keep you hooked right क्योंकि मतलब it's not just Pakistan is mercurial or whatever like दुनिया भर में leagues और टीमें और वो उनमें से कुछ ही हैं जो जीतती हैं ज्यादातर ना बाकी तो हर साल 20 में से 19 टीमें हारती हैं तो वो एक एक आई थिंक एक एसेंशियल चीज है फैंडम के लिए to have flaws and to have losses and to have rebirth and renewal And I think that was where I felt with the Indian team, you keep getting everything into your favor, and so when you're winning, kind of feels like,
बुली हैं,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
बुली
yeah.
हैं बेसिकली. और
and it's a shame because I think it's a remarkable set of cricketers in India. I do think it's probably in my lifetime the best Indian cricket team I've seen in every format.
and yet
But yeah, it's that's probably the only interesting thing about them.
I think one of the things that kind of contributes to this is that they themselves have already believed that they are great, and because when you start believing you're great, you see at the ये tournament छोड़ दो, semi-final तक जाना इंडिया का, nobody really, like, everyone expects India to go to the semi-finals. At that level is when you start meeting teams that are that can compete with you. And even at that level, like, you've heard Shastri say things like our legacy will be like the Australians of the early 2000s. अगर आप अभी से ये सब बातें करोगे तो फिर कहाँ से आप लेगेसी बिल्ड कर पाओगे? खैर, फॉर पाकिस्तान में अगर किसी फैशिस्ट को कुछ कोऑप्ट करना है तो आपकी स्क्वाश टीम को करेगा ना.
Well, I mean, they haven't, no one's won anything in forever. I think, I mean, cricket's cannibalized every other kind of sport. But I think in general, for fascists, sports is not a good choice. It's just,
But but that is for a smart fascist, right? Like this fascists in India don't seem to be smart enough
Because
to
you
get
know,
there.
yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
fair
Emma,
enough,
right?
fair enough.
This match which happened in Dubai could have, if not for the
अरे
pandemic,
यार,
this would
वो
have
तो
happened in Modi Stadium,
ड्रीम
and
कम ट्रू
that's
हो
where,
जाता अगर
yeah,
मोदी
dream come
स्टेडियम में
true
ये
हो
Yeah,
मैच
जाता,
होता
yeah,
और पाकिस्तान
seriously.
ये कर जाता, तो मतलब फिर तो ऑर्गेजम हो जाते.
yeah.
बेसिकली ये लोग ये इस बात को रिकॉग्नाइज ही नहीं करते हैं कि स्पोर्ट में no matter how much, like, you might have like 1,000 times more money than the opposition, but you still have that like 1% chance of losing the game.
Even even Dhoni had said that
हाँ,
eventually,
it'll
that
end.
eventually it will end, and eventually Pakistan are going to beat India in a
But if
World
you
Cup.
were
But
to
लोगों
but,
के नहीं समझ आता.
but if you happen to watch any of the Indian news channels the day of the game, सुबह 7 बजे से शुरू होके 7 साढ़े 7 बजे को भजन कीर्तन, पता नहीं रिलीजियस शेड तो दे ही दिया था उसको. There is a guy who was singing songs around like कैसे शाहीन को फैंटा लगेगा, मतलब ऐसे कुछ मतलब कोई कव्वाली टाइप का म्यूजिक बज रहा है. मतलब these people do not recognize the fact that sport offers that 1% chance to the other side, which
I
elections in
mean,
India might not.
yeah, वो 30 साल से 18-0 record है, so I don't blame them for like, like again, as somebody who's worked in television, and I'm glad I don't do television news anymore. But मतलब आपको कुछ ना कुछ तो चलाना है ना, मंजन बेचना है, as they say in the industry. तो वो अब जब मतलब कोई
Yeah.
मंजन इतना मुश्किल, वो तो अब now it's become easy, right? Like now the Shami is a villain and Kohli is a villain, and the underdog India है. So now there's अब मंजन बेचना थोड़ा आसान हुआ है.
कोक स्टूडियो से बात शुरू की थी तो कोक स्टूडियो से बात खत्म करना चाहूंगा. मैं आपको एक पीस ऑफ इन्फॉर्मेशन दे देता हूँ कि हमारे जो रोड ट्रांसपोर्ट मिनिस्टर हैं, उन्होंने अनाउंस किया है कि अब से जब भी इंडिया में रेड सिग्नल होगा तो उस सिग्नल पे क्लासिकल इंडियन म्यूजिक बजाया जाएगा. एंड आई थिंक दैट इज आवर वे टू गेट बैक टू बीटिंग कोक स्टूडियो.
उसके अलावा
बट
गाड़ी का जो हॉर्न है वो भी क्लासिकल इंडियन म्यूजिक के
वो
ट्यून में.
ऑलरेडी धूम
समझो ना
मचाले
किस
बजता ही
तरीके
है,
के
साथ में
फार्स
ये
में
भी
रहते
होगा.
हैं हम, किस तरीके के फार्स में जी रहे हैं हम लोग. But on that note, it was great having you, Amar. And but उसके
अच्छा,
अलावा
Emma, just a quick question, since you are actually a pop culture artist, and तो अभी बहुत ज़्यादा हमने politically इंडिया पाकिस्तान टाइप की मूवी की बात कर ली, but what have you seen any movies recently? Like, do you consume a lot of Hollywood या any other cinema? Which
I actually I have just been kind of not watching anything longer than YouTube food videos. So if I've consumed Indian content, so one of my favorite things to watch on YouTube is just people who film street food vendors, and there's no commentary, there's no explanation. It's just somebody just holding up their phone and recording food being made. And I love watching those, and I watch them from all over the world. So I watch a lot of it, like two brother make amazing omelette in Gujarat, tornado omelette, and like I fucking love those things. I'm disturbed by the amount of that Amul stringy cheese that
Cheese.
is added
हाँ
to
हाँ हाँ
everything.
हाँ, yeah.
But like I think I've somebody who's like really gotten more and more interested in food. और एक चीज जो होती है कि आई थिंक पाकिस्तान में जैसे जब कोई भी वेजिटेरियन बनता है ना, so it's like
पाकिस्तान वेजिटेरियन क्यों
publicly
बनता
तो
है?
What?
होते हैं, like for example, health reasons mostly,
Okay.
not mostly, but like health reasons, ethical reasons, whatever. तो उसमें वही होता है कि मतलब अब आपको एटलीस्ट कमर्शियली तो बहुत कम खाना मिलता है, राइट? एंड आई थिंक दैट्स समथिंग दैट रियली फैसिनेट्स मी अबाउट इंडिया के जो मतलब यहाँ पे वेजिटेरियन खाना, without really getting into the horrible politics of all of it, but like I really enjoy watching
हाँ, there's
the
a
dals
yeah.
and omelets and vada paos and whatever. But
कराची में
yeah,
डोसा मिल रहा
exactly.
है
Like
अभी?
there's 3-4 places that I know of, and there's a place called Khao Dosa, jo aapko they specialize in khawswe and dosa. Khawswe, I
Yeah,
don't know if
very
you guys
interesting.
know it, but like yeah,
Yeah.
Karachi ka food scene, that's something you have to experience. Like, I mean, I would really love to go around India and check out the food, but Karachi is a very kind of interesting mix of people from the subcontinent that just because of a bunch of factors is not replicated anywhere else. And that really kind of, you don't see it in a lot of other aspects of the culture, but it somehow made its way in the food.
बस ये लीज खत्म हो जाए फिर आता हूँ मैं
फिर तो हम सब ब्रिटिश सिटीजन हैं, फिर तो आना जाना लगा रहेगा. And on that note, thank you so much,
Yeah.
Amar.
Thank
We
you so
will
much,
wrap
Amar.
this.
No,
But
this was really fun. Really great range of topics.
there are a number of things that we can still talk about. So there is an open invitation for you to stop by whenever.
जब भी बोर हो
have
रहे हो
this
ना डीएम पे
ping
reply
कर
कर
दो.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. Thank you so much for having me.
Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny, and now the time comes when we shall redeem our pledge.
8 नवंबर 2016 की रात्रि को 12 बजे से
चीफ मिनिस्टर के लिए मेरा एक ही संदेश है कि वो राजधर्म का पालन करें.
हार्डवेयर वालों की सोच क्या होती है, हार्ड वर्क वालों की सोच क्या होती है.
अरे ये ना पंजाब की खुशबू.